We're learning new details tonight about the death of an influencer with local ties who was found dead while on vacation in Africa.
Please help me! Please help me!
Breaking news, we now know new details in the tragic passing of Ashlee Jenae. Ashlee Robinson, who went by Ashlee Jenae on social media, and her new fiancé were on vacation in Tanzania.
Ashlee Robinson was on the vacation of a lifetime. She was in Zanzibar, which is off the coast of Tanzania. She was there celebrating her 31st birthday.
This morning, the growing mystery surrounding the death of an American influencer while she was vacationing in Tanzania with her fiancé.
On April 3rd, 2026, Ashlee Jenae said yes beneath the wide, cinematic skies of a Tanzanian safari. And for a brief moment, her life looked like it had stepped straight into a dream. She was 31, a Miami-based lifestyle influencer with more than 100,000 Instagram followers, the kind of creator people didn't just scroll past, but genuinely followed because her world felt polished, aspirational, and alive.
Ashlee Robinson was on the vacation of a lifetime. She was in Zanzibar, which is off the coast of Tanzania. She was there celebrating her 31st birthday.
It's under investigation, and we don't know what went on.
It's under investigation, and like we said, we just want transparency.
Today, investigators in Tanzania held a news conference where they said they are questioning McCann and they are holding his passport until the autopsy results are complete. And Tony, we did reach out to McCann and have not heard back.
Beside her stood Joe McCann, 45, a crypto fund manager whose name carried weight in finance circles, a man tied to asymmetric investments and the kind of Bitcoin success story that made him seem untouchable from the outside. Together, they looked like the perfect modern power couple: luxury travel, a high-end resort, an engagement in one of the most beautiful places on earth. But 7 days later, that picture no longer looked romantic. It looked unsettling. Because between the proposal and Ashlee's disappearance, the public story began to fracture in ways that are now impossible to ignore. Instead of immediate urgency online, Joe's public behavior drew attention for a very different reason, and that contrast has only deepened the mystery. Even more unsettling, the timeline is so short it almost feels unreal, as if the entire relationship shifted from celebration to confusion before anyone had time to process what was happening.
We're learning new details tonight about the death of an influencer with local ties who was found dead while on vacation in Africa.
She was on a vacation of a lifetime in Zanzibar, Tanzania, which is on the east coast of Africa.
April 5th brought another snapshot of happiness when Ashlee posted for her 31st birthday, smiling, radiant, and seemingly at peace, which makes everything that followed feel even harder to understand. And that is where this story stops feeling like a glamorous getaway and starts feeling like a puzzle, one built from medical records, shifting timelines, public silence, and a question that still hangs over everything: what really happened inside that villa? The last photo Ashlee Jenae shared on April 5th looks almost too perfect in hindsight. Sunlit, calm, a woman fully immersed in what she believed was the beginning of her next chapter. Just 1 day later, on April 6th, she and Joe McCann checked into the Zuri Zanzibar Resort, a secluded luxury property along Tanzania's coastline, where privacy is part of the experience and each villa feels like its own isolated world. At first glance, nothing about that setting suggests urgency or danger. It's the kind of place designed for celebrations, not questions.
This morning, the growing mystery surrounding the death of an American influencer while she was vacationing in Tanzania with her fiancé.
We just want the truth. We just want to know what happened.
The parents of Ashlee Robinson, known on social media as Ashlee Jenae, speaking with ABC Philadelphia station WPVI.
But then the timeline takes a sudden, quiet turn. By the morning of April 9th, Ashlee was found unconscious inside that very villa, and within hours, the atmosphere surrounding this trip shifted from celebration to confusion. By April 10th, she was gone, less than a week after saying yes. That alone is difficult to process, but what deepens the unease is how quickly the narrative surrounding her final hours began to split into two very different versions. Her family's response didn't sound like uncertainty. It sounded like alarm, like they were seeing something others weren't. And maybe that's because, from their perspective, the pieces didn't just fail to fit, They seem to contradict each other entirely.
With her fiancé. You may have heard of Ashlee Jenae's passing over the weekend and the mystery in regards to whether or not she took her own life or was it her fiancé. Well, according to Zanzibar police, they have ruled that claiming that Ashlee Jenae, also her real name, Ashlee Robinson, hung herself in a wardrobe using cloth from her dress after a dispute with her fiancé, Joe McCann. Over the weekend, we had no idea.
What Joe McCann told authorities initially appeared straightforward, almost too straightforward, a version of events that framed Ashlee's death in a way that could be quickly understood and categorized. But then a second layer emerged, and it didn't align. Medical records obtained from another hospital, later reported by outlets like WPVI, pointed to cerebral hypoxia, a condition where the brain is deprived of oxygen. But the detail that follows is where the tension quietly escalates. According to those records, the underlying cause was listed as strangulation and suffocation, accompanied by mention of an unidentified mark around her neck. That phrasing alone introduces a level of ambiguity that's difficult to ignore, because in forensic context, wording is rarely accidental. An unidentified mark doesn't clearly support one explanation over another. It opens the door to interpretation, and that's exactly where the uncertainty grows. Ashlee's family didn't hesitate to challenge the initial narrative, not out of speculation, but because to them, it conflicted with everything they knew about her. And when people closest to someone begin questioning the official version this early, it raises a deeper, more uncomfortable possibility that the full story hasn't surfaced yet. The calls for justice didn't begin quietly. They came with urgency, with disbelief, with a sense that something about Ashlee Jenae's final days refused to settle into a simple explanation.
The call was shocking and it was devastating and scary, honestly, because we don't know what's going on and what happened.
What did they relay to you at that time?
Well, the communication came to us from the Hotel Zuri Zanzibar, where they were staying. It didn't come from the hospital or from the police.
Have you guys since spoken to authorities or the embassy?
No. We've had little contact with the embassy, but no, not with the police.
So were you told anything about the manner as to how she passed away or what exactly led up to her passing?
Officially, we have not talked to anyone or anybody in the medical field at all. Nothing has been.
What was it that the hotel initially told you guys?
That Joe McCann, who she was traveling with, that he had found her and that they had taken her to the hospital.
And then a follow-up call from the hotel several hours later.
And I
relaying.
She had just said yes to a proposal, just celebrated her birthday, just shared moments that felt full of life and direction, and yet within days, everything unraveled in a way no one close to her could reconcile. Friends and family weren't pointing to subtle warning signs or hidden struggles. They were pointing to the absence of them, to a version of Ashlee that showed no visible distress, no signals that something was weighing on her. And that absence, strangely, is what made the situation feel heavier, not lighter. Because when a life appears steady on the surface and still ends abruptly, it forces people to look beyond what was visible and start questioning what wasn't. But just as that question begins to form, another layer emerges, one that shifts the focus from who Ashlee was to what may have been happening around her in those final hours. Before Ashlee was found unconscious, there had already been a moment that disrupted the calm of that luxury setting, a disturbance significant enough that it didn't stay contained within the walls of a private villa. According to reports later confirmed by authorities in Philadelphia, other guests heard a loud argument coming from Ashlee and Joe's room, something intense enough that hotel staff felt the need to step in and intervene. That detail alone reframes the atmosphere entirely, turning what was supposed to be an intimate getaway into something far more volatile.
We just think it's very odd that our daughter is traveling with Joe and we don't hear anything from Joe. To me, that's very odd. And initial call that she got from Joe was 11 hours after something had transpired in the room. And that's very odd. 11 hours later,
11 hours.
Something had transpired and Joe just relayed to Yolanda that Ashlee was okay and she was stable and she was okay and don't worry about it.
But that she was at the hospital.
Yes. 11 hours later.
So have you spoken to him since, and what has he been saying?
There has been no communication.
Wow, shocking.
Staff members reportedly separated the two, moving Joe McCann to a different villa roughly 10 minutes away, creating physical distance between them. For a brief moment, that separation might have suggested resolution, or at least containment, but what followed only deepens the uncertainty. Because somewhere between that intervention and the moment Ashlee was discovered, there exists an 11-hour window that remains almost completely unaccounted for. 11 hours where timelines blur, movements are unclear, and critical questions linger without answers.
You guys have probably seen this very sad story circling the internet. Well, now there's been another update. Ashlee Jenae, the influencer who tragically on vacation, was involved in a dispute with her fiancé, Joe McCann, before her in Tanzania earlier this month, something local police say is now part of an active investigation. According to the North Ongoya Regional Police Commander Benedict Mapujira, the couple had a falling out at the luxury resort Zuri Zanzibar, with hotel staff stepping in and separating them into different rooms. Situation escalated enough for staff to alert authorities, with concerns raised about Ashlee's well-being, prompting a report to the Nungwi police station.
And when time itself becomes the missing piece, it often means the truth is sitting somewhere inside it, just out of reach. What is known as just enough clarity to make the unknown feel even more unsettling. Ashlee's father later stated that Joe did return to her villa, but not alone. He came back with resort security, and that's when she was found. That sequence raises a quiet but persistent question. If staff had already separated them for safety, what changed in those hours that led him back there, and why did it take so long for anyone to check on her? The resort, like most luxury properties, is equipped with security cameras, silent observers that could potentially map out movements, confirm timelines, and fill in the gaps that words currently cannot. Yet, as of now, that footage hasn't been publicly released, leaving a critical piece of the puzzle just beyond visibility. And then there's the broader context, the one that doesn't involve the villa directly, but may still shape the narrative. Joe McCann's public image was built on success, confidence, and financial dominance in the volatile world of crypto investing, a space where perception can be just as valuable as performance. If that image began to shift, even slightly, the pressure to maintain it wouldn't just be professional, it would be deeply personal. And sometimes, it's not the obvious details that define a story like this, but the underlying tensions that were never meant to be seen. What makes this next part so difficult to process isn't just what happened, it's how everything around it continued as if nothing had changed. On the surface, the trips, the engagement, the luxury settings, and the carefully curated lifestyle all reinforced a very specific image: success, control, momentum. Even as reports suggested his fund had taken a significant downturn, that external picture remained polished, almost untouched. And within that image, Ashlee Jenae wasn't just a partner, she was part of the story being told to the world, a visual confirmation that everything was still moving forward. But when an image starts requiring constant maintenance, when perception begins to outweigh reality, it can quietly shift from something empowering into something fragile. Behind the scenes, there were signs of pressure, projects that didn't materialize, partnerships that reportedly pulled back, public comments that hinted at a changing reputation. None of that proves intent or outcome, but it does introduce a question that keeps resurfacing. What happens when maintaining the illusion becomes harder than sustaining the truth? And more importantly, how does that pressure show up when no one is watching? Because while Ashlee's absence was beginning to take shape as a growing concern, Joe McCann's online presence told a completely different story, one that felt disconnected in a way people couldn't easily ignore. Posts continued, conversations unfolded, commentary about markets, technology, and global trends carried on as though the world around him was unchanged. On April 6th, when communication with Ashlee had already gone quiet, his account remained active, sharing thoughts on economic systems and optimism about the future. By April 7th, as timelines suggest something may have already gone wrong, the post shifted towards startup trends and emerging industries. And on April 8th, still no public acknowledgement, no visible urgency, just more engagement with topics far removed from what was unfolding privately. That contrast didn't just raise eyebrows, it created a kind of emotional dissonance that's hard to explain away. Because in moments of uncertainty, people tend to narrow their focus, not expand it. Adding to that unease, his Instagram accounts were later taken down as attention around the case grew, a move that only intensified public reaction rather than quieting it. And as more people began to revisit those posts, reading them against the backdrop of what was happening at the same time, the question shifted from what occurred inside that villa to why the outside world seemed to carry on so normally in the middle of it. The deeper you look into this case, the more it starts to feel like there are pieces just out of frame, details that exist but haven't been fully revealed yet. Investigations like this don't just rely on statements. They depend on timelines, digital footprints, surveillance, and the small, often overlooked moments that quietly connect everything together. And in this situation, some of the most critical elements, like the resort's security footage, internal reports, and complete movement logs, remain out of public view, creating a kind of informational silence that's hard to ignore. Because when key evidence exists but isn't accessible, it doesn't close questions, it amplifies them. At the same time, multiple narratives continue to circulate, each one shaped by different sources, different interpretations, and different levels of access to information. That doesn't necessarily mean one is correct and the other isn't. But it does mean the full picture hasn't settled yet. And in cases where timelines are tight, behaviors feel inconsistent, and official details leave room for interpretation, the truth tends to reveal itself slowly, often in fragments rather than in a single, clear answer. What makes this moment especially significant is that the story isn't finished. It's still unfolding, still being examined, still waiting for the pieces that could either confirm what people suspect or completely change how this entire situation is understood. The reaction online didn't unfold quietly. It erupted, fast and emotional, as people began connecting timelines that didn't seem to align. Comments flooded in, some expressing confusion, others outright suspicion, pointing to the contrast between what had happened and how it appeared publicly. Of course, social media reactions aren't evidence, and they never replace a formal investigation, but they do reflect a collective instinct when something feels off. Because when a sudden loss occurs under unclear circumstances, the expected response tends to follow a certain emotional gravity: silence, shock, visible grief, or at the very least, acknowledgement. Yet here, the digital trail seemed to move in a different direction entirely, and that divergence became part of the broader conversation. It's not proof of anything on its own, but it adds another layer to a situation already filled with unanswered questions. And when patterns of behavior don't match what people anticipate in moments like these, it naturally leads to deeper scrutiny, whether justified or not. As of now, the investigation sits in a tense, unresolved space where movement is happening, but clarity is not. On April 16, 2026, Ashlee's father, Harry Robinson, traveled to Washington, D.C., pushing for U.S. officials to become directly involved rather than waiting for answers to arrive on their own timeline. That same day, contact was reportedly made with Tanzanian authorities, confirming that an autopsy had been completed, but the details remained withheld from the family, leaving them in a state of prolonged uncertainty. And that absence of information carries its own weight because closure doesn't begin until answers do. Adding to that emotional strain, Ashlee's body has yet to be returned home, meaning her family is still waiting not just for explanations, but for the chance to say goodbye. Meanwhile, Joe McCann is being questioned as a witness, not formally charged, but also not free to leave, with his passport reportedly held by authorities, a detail that quietly signals the investigation is far from over. The family's requests remain clear: full transparency, access to evidence, an independent review, and Ashlee brought back home. And when you place those demands alongside the existing details, the medical findings, the timeline gaps, the reported disturbance, it becomes clear why this case hasn't settled into a single conclusion. Instead, it lingers in that uncomfortable space between possibilities, where each new detail could shift everything. Because at the end of all this, the real question hasn't changed. It's only become heavier. What actually happened during those missing hours? And why does every new piece of information seem to raise just as many questions as it answers? Comment below with what you think is really going on. Leave a like if this gave you chills, and subscribe. Plus turn on notifications if you want to see more Hollywood secrets